So the 2024 election is over, and as we probably all know by now, Donald Trump has won. In the aftermath of all this, people are trying to point fingers in all kinds of directions and find out what's to blame for this victory. One interesting idea that I think comes out of this is the idea that Trump appealed to low propensity voters, people who are not super engaged with necessarily politics or the mainstream media, and are very often going to be younger men. And one way that is often proposed as the method of engagement with this is digital media, things like podcasts and social media. So this also includes outreach on the platform TikTok, which both Democrats and Republicans have both tried to ban, but also used to boost their own campaigns. In fact, an advisor for Trump, Kellyanne Conway, actually said, quote, he appreciates the breadth and reach of TikTok, which he used masterfully along with podcasts and new media entrants to win. So that's top Trump advisor saying that TikTok is a reason for Trump's victory. We take that with a grain of salt. They want to frame things a certain way to make themselves look good. And these advisors are probably some of the people telling Trump to use this new form of digital media. But I do think that it is worth looking into this with a little bit more detail and seeing what we can actually learn from Trump's success on digital media and maybe take a look at whether that did actually impact the election or what kind of result that might have had. I think this is also interesting because of what I mentioned earlier about both Democrats and Republicans, including Trump himself, trying to ban TikTok in the past and looking at why they might have changed their mind. I think one reason for this is probably the fact that these politicians are seeing success in terms of their social media reach when they are on TikTok. So they want to, keep it around so they can continue to boost their own success through it. Part of this is donor Jeff Yass, who is invested in TikTok and is a major Republican lobbyist. So I think his role probably is pretty important in all of this. And of course, because Democrats are trying to ban TikTok themselves, Trump can kind of use this as an opportunity to paint himself as taking the right side on a quote unquote right side on a particularly popular issue and playing up that to the crowd, as Trump has now said he will no longer want to ban TikTok. So with all of this discourse swirling around, I wanted to look into things for myself. I watched a fair amount of TikToks, enough to get some brain rot from it, certainly. And I took some data from about 100 different TikToks that I think are going to help inform this analysis and what I'm going to be talking about in this video. This included 25 videos from 4 different political campaign accounts. We have the, of course, Kamala Harris and Real Donald Trump accounts, which are the main accounts of both candidates. And then we have the Kamala HQ and Team Trump accounts, which are going to be kind of the secondary or official campaign accounts of both candidates. So using that set of 100 videos, I collected some data that I hope will help us take a look at the way that the different campaigns went on TikTok. Of course, this only kind of captures the final message the campaigns are giving to voters, since these were just TikToks from right before the election. And it was, the data was collected about a week after the election, so all the view and like counts aren't going to be perfectly in sync with what they would have been before the election. But based on both numbers I checked before the election and just generally looking at how much the TikToks have been gaining attention in the time since the election, I think that I feel pretty confident that the data is more or less reflective of the reality of the situation before the election as well. So here is what I found. To start off with, Kamala's accounts post more videos and have more total likes, which you can kind of just tell right away from looking at their profiles. But I think that this is not the most accurate metric to look at to understand the reality of how they're performing on the platform. And I think that generally speaking, the Kamala HQ and Kamala Harris accounts performed worse than the Donald Trump accounts in a few different ways. So the first way is by looking at views. Here are the 4 accounts logged with the average and median views for these 25 videos. As you can see, looking at this data, the average Team Trump video got close to 20 million views in this period, which is pretty crazy. But looking at the median, it's a little bit more expected, somewhere over the 5 million, probably at least 6 or 7 million range. Real Donald Trump is a little bit higher than that, and both of them are higher than Kamala Harris and, of course, Kamala HQ, which has the worst performance out of any of these accounts from the period I looked at. And the reason I include the average and the median is because while they are both useful, the average can be distorted by one or two super viral videos. They might not be reflective of the typical piece of content on the app. But even when looking at median, while the difference isn't quite as stark, there is still a big difference, and a difference that lends itself to Donald Trump in terms of the typical views expected. So basically, the main takeaway you can get from just the view count is that Trump is getting more attention on social media. It doesn't necessarily mean all of that attention is positive, of course. So I did want to look at more data than just the views. I also looked at the likes that these TikToks are getting, and we see pretty similar results. The Trump accounts perform better in terms of the average and median likes than the Harris accounts. There is a little bit less of a difference when you're looking at the median likes. It's not quite as drastic. But once again, we do also have the high average likes from Team Trump because of a few viral videos. And we do generally have a trend of the outperformance from the Republican candidate compared to the Democratic candidate. And just to give you an idea of what some of these videos look like, this is the video that went super viral on Team Trump that is bumping up their numbers a lot.
Is never gonna be me in November. Donna's gonna make the country better than you can remember. Camel is never gonna be me in November. Hey, Margarita.
It might not be exactly what you expect because it's just kind of like a vibes-based videos, which is honestly what a lot of these TikTok videos are. They're not all super, in-depth political videos, right? Most of them are short, snappy videos. Well, generally, those are ones performing the best. They have music in the background pretty often, as is, of course, very common on TikTok. And when there were slower videos for Trump, they usually focused on either him just talking to the camera about a policy or like a longer political ad about a policy. For Harris, there was a few of her talking to the camera, mostly just telling people to go vote, kind of get out the vote style videos. And then there were a few like longer political ads from her as well. But most of them are using the platform more or less as intended for the kind of short, snappy content that is at least the most popular on there. And to get a better idea of what exactly the type of content that they are creating on these different accounts, I also created a few different types of categories that I grouped the TikToks into. So basically, these included things like videos promoting endorsements, videos that were just telling people to get out the vote, videos that contained a policy message, and then videos that were mostly just like vibes based. There's a few others, but those are the main big categories. Some of the trends I noticed when looking at this is that Trump's videos were much more likely to contain a policy message. Total, he had about over twice as many videos that did this. And the main messages that he was hitting on were immigration, inflation and the cost of living, and foreign policy. To go into a little bit more depth on that, obviously, for those of you who don't know, Trump's main message on immigration is this kind of very racist, xenophobic idea that we need to deport all undocumented immigrants, and which would be a very violent, brutal act. But he's able to frame it in a way that works for him very well politically as something that is going to solve certain economic or social problems in the country, right? So this is a very unfortunately successful message for Trump that he's promoting a lot on TikTok, is the immigration messaging that he's been spewing everywhere. Then there's the economic issues, which is mostly just him saying that the Democrats are to blame for inflation and that he's going to fix it. So it's not like a super coherent policy message, but it is one that I think resonates with a lot of people's economic issues, and I think has been working for him pretty well and worked for him pretty well in this election. And so that's another one that he's hitting on a lot on TikTok. And then the other one is going to be foreign policy, trying to paint himself as the peace candidate. He does this in a few different TikToks. There's one where he gets endorsements from Muslim leaders. There's other ones where he is just, saying that he's going to create peace in the Middle East and, generally trying to paint himself in this way.
You're going to have peace in the Middle East.
We want a change. That's what's important right now. We cannot vote for war.
Kamala, on the other hand, her TikToks rarely mentioned policy. There were a few that did mention policy. They were mostly around women's rights or abortion, which I think makes sense. Those are smart issues for her to be hitting on. She is much more popular than Trump, especially on the issue of abortion, and it makes sense to be communicating that issue's importance to voters and be drawing a contrast with Trump on that issue. I think that's a smart idea. They honestly probably should have done it more often. And then for a few of the other issues that she mentioned, they're just like kind of one-offs because, this is a pretty small sample size. There was one where she mentioned healthcare, which I think is good to be mentioning, but because she doesn't support anything like a public option or Medicare for all, there isn't a super strong message she can give on healthcare other than, maybe I'll do a few tweaks around the edges, better at-home care, expanding Medicare a little bit, that kind of thing. It isn't a super like powerful policy message other than just like, I will support more healthcare, which is pretty vague. I think it could work, but it could use some work. And then there is the immigration one. She played a clip of Trump saying that, he's to blame for the right-wing immigration bill failing, which once again, I don't think is the strongest message because it kind of is ceding ground to Trump and saying, Trump's right about immigration. We should have passed this right-wing immigration bill, but actually he's the one who stopped us from doing it, which just kind of makes the Democrats look a little bit weak, I think, and doesn't really actually push back against any of the racist rhetoric of Trump. So that's my analysis of the two different policy areas and the policy messages that both of them are putting out on TikTok. I think that Trump was a lot more successful with the policy messages that he put out compared to the Harris campaign. And I think that he did so a lot more frequently as well, which I think was probably a smart move. And, because at the end of the day, you can promote your vibes and your endorsements as much as you want. And, you should promote those on TikTok. Those are probably a good place to do that. But you do need to include some level of messaging around how you're actually going to make a change in the country. And I think that what I have seen based on these TikToks is that Trump was doing that a lot more frequently and a lot more successfully than Harris was. And overall, I would say that Trump's TikToks had a lot more of a quality over quantity approach. There were a few Kamala Harris videos that had just kind of bad audio quality or didn't have any music going on and were just kind of like not really much there. Especially one that stood out to me was the Oprah video that just really had bad audio, which is like kind of disappointing when you consider the fact that it's been reported that the Kamala Harris campaign spent $1 million to get Oprah to show up for them. And then they couldn't even make a good TikTok out of it. I mean, that's pretty disappointing. Trump's, on the other hand, were more consistently well-edited, quick, snappy. He was also using hip-hop music more often, which I found interesting, and I think probably is like a sort of smart thing to do to appeal to these young men that Trump was trying to appeal to. Harris's videos did occasionally use like smart and like catchy musical choices. She used some Charli XCX and Lorde. She used like a fair different amount of like, pop music. Both campaigns also just used a lot of like kind of like generic background music to generate a specific kind of like emotion. Whether it be like, it's more like sentimental music or sad or uplifting. That was pretty common for both of them. But in terms of like things outside of that, I think Trump probably did a little bit better with like keeping it to short, snappy, hip music choices. There are also just like a few weird things I noticed, which are probably not all that important, but I couldn't make this video without mentioning them. One of these is the weird Trump prayer video, which I think I probably can just play, and most people who are watching this video will probably understand why I think it's weird, so I'm just going to play that now.
So I ask that you would anoint President Donald Trump and give him a spirit of wisdom and understanding and insight as he moves to lead this nation back to greatness. In Jesus' name I pray.
And then another thing I wanted to mention about Harris's videos is that a lot of them were just like super repetitive, repeating the same slogans and messages a lot. Like, when we fight, we win, we aren't going back, that kind of thing, which like, I get why you want to reinforce messaging that you think is successful. Obviously in hindsight, neither of these slogans look particularly good. But in the moment I understand that. I just think it was a little bit too much probably. I think this kind of just like further cements the theme of Trump having quality over quantity on TikTok and the Harris campaign having more quantity but less quality on their TikToks. They weren't able to have like a wide variety of different kinds of TikToks. They were having a lot of the same things on there. And that's probably partially why they weren't doing as well. It's because people had already seen these things before. So fundamentally, I think that what this represents and why this matters is not that TikTok decided the election. I don't think TikTok decided the election. It might have influenced a few voters here and there to either go vote or change who they were going to vote for. But I don't think it was like a huge crucial factor or anything. I think this is mostly interesting because it's representative of broader failures of the Democratic Party's campaigning strategy and successes for the Trump campaign and the Republican Party. I do also, of course, want to emphasize, like all industries and all social media platforms, we can't ignore who actually owns them and who's invested in them. And in this case, we do have at least one Republican investor in TikTok that probably did help Trump, at least secure more, favorable platform. And I think that also just the fact that Trump is willing to say that he's not going to ban TikTok anymore probably led to TikTok ownership being more sympathetic to him, if I had to guess, and certainly didn't hurt him. So I think that you always need to take that into account as well. That's what this video is focused on, but I do think that's probably just as important as everything else I've talked about as to why there's more of a success for Trump on the platform. So with that being said, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it was interesting. If you disagree or have anything you wanted to add, please go ahead and throw it in the comments. I'm happy to hear what people say. If you like this and want to check it out again or watch more stuff I'm putting out here, I appreciate people subscribing, liking, sharing it, whatever you can, just because this is something that I am passionate about doing and I like doing, and having that support would give me an excuse to do it more, but also maybe, the ability to do it more too if it ends up actually doing any kind of way successfully. So appreciate you all, and that's all I got for you today. Bye-bye.